that Scalabrini is innovating and doing differently. So I thought I'd pose the question to you, are you a Henry or a Steve? And this is the audience participation part of the conference. There's a bottle of wine on the go for the person that correctly guesses, or the first person who correctly guesses what these numbers represent. Looks like I'm going to be carrying the bottle of wine back on the train tonight. I got a lot of sympathetic glances with the bottle sort of protruding through my computer bag this morning. No idea? Sorry? No. Property assets. Lady over there, you got half there. So that's a selection of operators in the sector. And so why I start off with that, and hopefully my finance team have got those numbers right, but is to talk about these two individuals, Henry and Steve. And both of them are really the architects of creating new markets. Henry Ford with the motor vehicle, Steve Jobs with consumer electronics. And Henry Ford is known to kind of say, well, you know, you can have a car as long as it's black. Yeah, we've all probably heard that before. Whereas Steve Jobs and his team spent time looking at really unexplored areas of unmet customer demand, or even things that customers hadn't thought of as yet. So my challenge to all of you in this room is, in your organizations, are you Henrys or Steves? And I think historically, the sector has been really good at being Henry. You know, this is the way we do it. You need to come in on our terms. And that goes for both RAC and RV, by the way, as I totally alienate the whole room. But part of it is that, you know, this is what your mortgage is tied to, people in this room. Whether you're a consultant to the industry, whether you're an executive who fights, and we heard earlier about the virtual head office where the department heads don't fight, but yeah, people's mortgages, people's status, people's short-term incentive schemes, people's long-term incentive schemes are actually linked to the status quo. And that makes change particularly difficult. So, Scalabrini, we were the one that people used to snigger about. Yeah, we were a one-song choir. We only did RAC. Some days we did it really well. As you note from the last point, there were days that it didn't work. 15 years of consecutive EBITDA losses. Fortunately, we had property in Sydney that we were able to sell and release cash. So you've got to earn the right to do this sort of stuff. So where are we today? We're in a stable state. For a faith-based organization, for the first time in its 60-year history, we actually have a mission plan. So we understand our origins, we understand what we stand for, and we understand what positive impact we're trying to create. It's different from a strategic plan, because a strategic plan tells you the direction and the destination. Mission plan tells you where the heart is of what you're trying to achieve. Last financial year, first positive EBITDA result. Our directors are sleeping better at night, positive accreditation outcomes, and extending the repertoire. So the question we posed was, what was the problem we're trying to solve? So this is some research from the Royal Commission. So already it's 3 or 4 years old, and they commissioned an organization to go out and survey people on attitudes around aging and care. And so for 92% of people, when needing support, they were saying, I want to stay in my own home. And the definition for care, by the way, was nursing care, when they posed the question, 75% of people said, I still want to stay in my own home. Now, if like us, you are a RAC provider, that breaks you out in a cold sweat, because your customers have moved beyond what you're offering. And yesterday I referenced the moment that if you're a RAC operator, you've got to be careful you don't fall into the same trap that Kodak did. Kodak executives sat around the table saying, we do this really well, and people will always want film. Yeah, They're now a footnote in corporate history in America and globally. So, fortunately, I've done some of this before, so I can speak ideation, I can speak co-design. I know the difference between agile and waterfall. In spite of my body shape, I can do a sprint. And the key thing, though, is what I learned leading a customer transformation team was that this notion of minimum viable product. So with a very supportive board, they've supported me and the team to start testing and trialing. So what I'm going to do today, at Chris's request, is talk a little about what one of those trials delivered. But first, we had to have a value proposition. And this is the value proposition: live easy. So in all of these new ventures, this is the platform that we're starting from. And our premise is, customer, how do we make your life and how do we make your ability to live easy and easier? So the first trial that concluded in January was what we called the Live Easy Hub. So what did we learn? Because test and trial are great, but you've got to actually learn, and that horrible management speak word, pivot, and change what you're doing. So I'm going to share with you some of those learnings, because I think there are themes here that are probably relevant for a number of people in this room. Okay. The first thing is, we said to our well-being team, why don't you guys run these trials? Because we had 3 trials. And what they did was, we've got the answer. We'll just take a rack lifestyle program and plonk it into one of these. So it required a lot of kind of rewiring of people's heads to go, no, it's not a rack lifestyle program. It's completely different because the customer base is completely different. In one of my iterations in Australia, I worked for an organization that had a very successful day respite program in Canberra in conjunction with the ACT Health Department, been running for decades and decades. So I walked into this situation going, I kind of know what the answer is. Yeah? We discovered really quickly it's actually not a day respite program. Why? Because back to the previous slide, people staying in their homes a lot longer, social isolation, loneliness. You know, if they need residential care or respite care, they go into respite. They don't come to these sort of programs. So your customer base is quite different. User pays. Now, this was the interesting, social experiment. Is we were busy applying for a home care provider license. More about that later. But I said, well, let's test out to see what the user pays appetite is for this. Very, very little resistance. The resistance came from people saying, I'm getting government funding, when can I start using it? But we managed to build a client base during the 6-month trial that was entirely user pays. As you can tell from the accent, I come from a continent where effectively user pays is what everybody's used to. So it's an interesting hypothesis, and we've heard some comments from Prue today where that sits as an opportunity. Alignment to mission. So we did the Robin Hood thing. We trialed it in Des Moines and charged a higher price point, and we trialed it in another location in a suburb in Sydney called Mount Pritchard, where we substantially discounted it. Why? Because we understood the purpose of our mission, which was to support migrant populations, and in that particular location, there was a high density of migrants that we wanted to make it accessible. So yes, the surplus we generate in RAC, finally, which we will continue generating, will be used to provide that level of cross-subsidization. The setting matters. So we start off by going, let's test it in 3 locations. We've got 6 sites, and I said, right, let's test it in these 2. And I chose them deliberately because the community hall had access from outside. You didn't have to walk through the rack to get to the operating environment where we were going to run these hubs. And then I had this thought that I went, well, where else are there ready-made communities that we should be testing it in? So we're a Catholic faith-based organization linked to the Scalabrini congregation. So I went to one of their parishes in Sydney and said, do you mind if we use your church hall for this program? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? There's a hall, tends to be underutilized during the week because worship's on the weekend. Guess what? There's a commercial kitchen. There's tables and chairs. There's an audiovisual setup. And guess what? They've got disabled toilets and accessibility and plenty of parking. Bonus. Why don't we try that out? The 2 rack locations bombed horribly. So in spite of the physical setup, people didn't want to come into a rack. Even for a day program, and we spent some time educating potential people, that was a struggle. So a little awkward, because I'd said to my 6 site managers, guess what? We're going to do this trial, and by January, February 2024, all of you are going to have a hub at your location. So it became apparent in about November that actually wasn't going to happen. Yeah? So we've gone, this is where the growth will come from, and a bit about that in a moment. So the moments of joy arise. It's really interesting. In the parish location in Mount Pritchard, we had a group of Filipino friends who arrived one day and said, we thought we might as well come along, and said, well, what are you doing? And they went, oh, we'd love to do karaoke. So we went, sure. One of the team went, I've got a machine at home, so they jumped into their car and drove home and bought the karaoke. They had a ball, that group of 13 friends. They kept on coming week after week. The following week, they said, oh, by the way, because it looked like you weren't ready for us today with the karaoke, can you make sure the machine's here again? And we'd like to do line dancing. So the people who know Filipinos, they love karaoke and they love line dancing. So the following week, we had line dancing, and we had our original customer who was on a walker, fiery Italian lady. And she said, oh, I can't do this. So she wheeled us off to a table, parked her, and was watching everybody. And we've got this lovely video of her actually unconsciously taking a step back and starting to dance. And we showed her daughters at the end of the day, and they both wept because they said, our mother hasn't mobilized like that for years. But she was caught up in that moment of joy and was captivated and taken to a different space. And therein lies the opportunity that we think we can realize. Community creation. And look, the reason we tested in a parish faith-based community setting was a ready-made community. Fair enough. In the Catholic Church, guess what? Most of the congregation are aging anyway. Perfect for our demographic. So why don't we test some more of that? But we had somebody who arrived, and in their second week, their wife came in with a cake. And we went, oh, thank you, that's great, but no, we do the morning and afternoon teach. And she said, no, what you don't realize is my husband starts talking about the program, so we run it on a Wednesday, starts talking about the program on Monday afternoon and talks about it on Tuesday. He can't wait to come. And I see what the difference it's making for him, and so I want to contribute. And it gives me purpose. So every Tuesday, we sit and go, what cake should we bake? And then we bake a cake and bring it along as our contribution. So the creation of community is the key. And ultimately, solving customers' problems. So we went from a model that said, I know what a day respite program looks like, to a situation where we realized, through some research that we had done, that actually, which is where the brand promise of Live Easy comes from, is our customers want their problems solved. So through those conversations, we realized that elderly people may have an iPad to communicate with their children or grandchildren who are overseas, but don't have a printer or a computer at home. But guess what? Most forms are online. So they fill it in their iPad, but how do they print it off? How do they sign it? How do they get it done by a JP? So now as we industrialize this concept, we're saying, how do we do this differently? What are the other kind of life admin and the concierge type services we should be baking into it? So what's next? We're going to scale up these hubs. It's interesting, you talk about solving the customer's problem. I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago to a parish priest and their council and talked about the program. And by the end of the meeting, they had said, sign us up for 2, because they operate 2 parishes, 2 churches. So that's already, I'd set a modest growth thing of 4 of these by the end of the year, and I'm 3/4 of the way there already, so hopefully the board makes me think I'm a rock star from that perspective. But I think there's opportunities, and more importantly, it's not just Catholic faith-based opportunities. It's using other infrastructure, physical infrastructure, that doesn't belong to you. And you have that with 5 Good Friends, who've gone into New Zealand and are using it in the reverse, offering their programs within retirement villages there. The next thing is Live Easy, and we're talking about it as our not home care launch. So in the next month, we're going to launch another trial, so minimum viable product, another trial to see what we're going to do. And Prue, I took a photo of one of your slides, and I went to the team and said, the Live Easy Buddy is spot on, because we're calling it a Live Easy Buddy, and they are the concierge that is going to help our customers live easy. And then for the last 4 or 5 months, now we're at 680 beds, 1,200 staff, so we're not a big organization. But we took the investment of taking a senior leader out of the business for 4.5 months to do some research in some Sydney local government areas that we've decided as part of our mission plan we were going to get involved in. Different migrant communities, yeah? So we've expanded. People go, but hang on, aren't you the Italian guys? We've moved beyond that into other migrant groups, yeah? And so that person has spent 4.5 months going around talking to councils, associations, ethnic groups, faith-based and not just Catholic, different denominations, different religious faiths, to say, what is the need that you want? Because we didn't want to be the provider that came in and said, oh, here's our toolkit, because then you're just a Henry. Better conversation is to start with a customer and saying, what is the solution that you want and that you need? Thank you very much. Is that it?
Thank you very much. That was excellent, as expected, Richard. Do we have any questions?
My marketing guy put that up. Can you that's a NAF slide. Can we just take it down? Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Richard? The point being that you're doing stuff. You're doing stuff, Richard.
And I think, to echo some of the sentiments, it's a really exciting time to be in the sector, because we've got it within our control to fundamentally alter what the future looks like. Because guess what? Our customers are going to do it for us. And what struck me, we're coming from New Zealand, operating MetLife Care, into Australia, was the absence of this kind of assisted living service department concept. And I was on the sidelines at Bupa Health Insurance. I should just make that clear in the bio. Didn't work for Bupa Aged Care, but Bupa Health Insurance, because that's still got a bit of a thing to it. But I would say to the aged care people, what is this thing? And they said, oh, no, there's low care and there's high care. And the funding moved, and the entire sector thought the customers didn't need this anymore because we were chasing the money. And that was part of the exercise around the user pays thing, to go, what happens if you divorce yourself from that paradigm and say, if you meet customer need, will they pay? Will the money flow? And the money will flow. I was saying to somebody yesterday, I'm surprised Uber hasn't created a family Uber account where children and their grandchildren can tip in $10 a month into a family bank account, and the grandparents get delivered food from their favorite restaurants 2 or 3 times a week. Who's got single parents who the spouse has died and they sit at home and they don't eat properly? So I think there are people out there that are going to be thinking about disruptive stuff, because Uber's got the infrastructure. And then they're going to look at adjacency and say, how do we amplify the infrastructure we got with this grey tsunami that's coming? That'll be what we're facing. Anyway, thank you.
Can we show our appreciation?
Thanks, respect.
Excellent. Our next presentation is from Brian Wong and his colleagues at CommBank, And it's all very well to have all these ideas and so on, but if we don't have the support of the banks, then there's very little we can do. Many boards have been waiting for the time when we are viable, and we're through optimism, that's on the horizon. And so the first person that's going to be rung is the banks. Now, CommBank is Australia's largest bank, and over the years in our discussions with them, it has been brought up that they see the majority of the funding applications come through because they're the largest. So therefore, again, they have more knowledge perhaps than any other banking group, and that's a valuable resource for us. We ask their advice on a regular basis. So I'd like to ask Brian and his colleagues to come up and discuss the funding appetite across the country.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Wong. I'm from CommBank Health's Policy and Performance team. Part of my role and my team's role is setting the lending appetite for the seniors living sector. So this is actually my second year speaking in front of you. Really honoured to be doing that. But I think when I reflect about when I was standing up on stage 12 months ago, it was a very different world that we were living in. I feel the industry from a banking perspective is in a much better place than it was 12 months ago, and that's very much in line with what we've been hearing for the last 1.5 days as well. But before I go further, I wanted to introduce the panellists who are up on stage with me today. So we're joined by some senior health bankers from across the country. We've got Scott Meredith from our Queensland health team, Belinda Hegarty, who leads our New South Wales health team, Andrew Dungy, who's joined us from our WA health team, and Kate McKendrick from our Victorian health team. So thank you for joining me on stage today. It's important to note there's 5 of us on stage, but we have representation nationally across the country. So if you're from SA, NT, ACT or Tasmania, we have local seniors banking specialists as well. So if you would like to connect with your local bankers and you're from those states, I'm happy to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to put you in touch. Just going to move forward, Sorry, better put that up. So today's agenda, I'm going to start with a brief review of the macro environment, sort of comparing what it was like 12 months ago when I spoke to you all. And following this, we'll get stuck into the panel discussion with our panellists providing some unique insights from a state perspective, covering all areas of all the sectors of seniors living. But before I do go on, I did want to touch on the task force report. And it won't surprise you all, very, very similar to the other speakers who have spoken about it over the last 1.5 days. From a banking perspective, we do view this favourably for the sector. Additional funding, which is going to improve the financial viability of the sector, is obviously good for the sector, and a more financially viable sector is going to be able to attract more capital, which includes bank funding. What I will say is the task force report for aged care, it really does highlight that aged care is a rapidly changing, and it's a complex industry. It's probably one of the most complex industries that we bank. We need to, as a bank, work really closely with you as a sector to understand the changes, to help influence the changes so that it's, for the benefit for the sector of all. So it really does highlight to me as we go through this progress, as more details land about how it's practically going to work, it's really important for you as operators to stay really close to your banks and talk to us so we can find solutions together. I'm just going to jump into the macro environment now. And when I spoke to you last year, starting with the cash rate, I think the cash rate was at 3.6%. We were in the middle of one of our sharpest rate hike cycles that we had experienced, and you can see that on the graph on the left of the screen. While over the last 12 months, that cash rate has increased a bit more at 4.35% today. It was on hold yesterday, so it was easy. I didn't have to change this presentation. You can see from the graph in the middle, there is some good news that CBA is forecasting this as the peak, and we are forecasting some cuts for the second half of this year. So we're forecasting 0.75% cuts the second half of this calendar year, followed by a further 0.75% of cuts in 2025, which will bring the cash rate to 2.85% by the end of 2025 calendar year. So this is obviously going to improve your borrowing capacity and your serviceability metrics. Spoke to you about housing prices again 12 months ago as well. We had that incredible growth in 2021, followed by a 6% contraction in 2022. 12 months ago, given we were in the middle of that tightening cycle, the market did forecast that 2023 was going to contract further, but that's not what has happened in 2023. We actually saw prices rise again by 9%, despite what was happening in interest rates. So you can see that on the graph on the left-hand side. And in the table in the middle, you can see CBA's forecast of housing prices for 2024. We're forecasting growth nationally of 5% across the 8 capital cities on average in 2024. So we know, again, this is not 100% correlated with your RAD IOU prices, but it should be taken into consideration when you're considering your accommodation pricing. Construction costs. This was probably the most, this was probably one of the biggest points that I spoke about 12 months ago. We had price rises on average 11.9% in 2022. So something we hadn't seen for a long time. Positively, it has normalised, and you can see it is sort of normalised to a 2.9% increase in 2023. And if we actually look on the quarter-by-quarter changes, it actually also tells a positive story as well. With the latest quarter, DEC 23, a 0.8% increase, and you compare that with 12 months ago, DEC 22, that was a 1.9% increase. So we are seeing these normalise. And I think that is supported by the resi data that we're seeing, which is in the graph in the middle and the graph on the right. They are down from their peak levels from a year or two ago. So we're hoping this more normal market, this much more stable market, is going to give you as operators a bit more confidence to move forward with your developments, to bring forward beds, ILUs and houses that the sector desperately needs. I think that's enough from me and the macro environment. So we're going to get into the panel discussions now. So I think we'll probably go around each of you from the individual states, give a brief overview from your state perspective, what you're seeing. And Scott, you're sitting next to me. I think we'll start with you in Queensland.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. In terms of the 3 sectors that I cover up in Queensland, aged care, retirement and land lease communities, they're all performing really well at present. From an aged care perspective, we're seeing really strong occupancy in, no surprises, in single en-suited accommodation. But interestingly, we're also seeing some of those older style racks also now seeing some good occupancy, largely driven, I suppose, by a lack of new supply coming online. And it's fascinating because, you wind the clock back pre-COVID, and certainly that shared accommodation was on the nose. COVID came along, and no one wanted to put mum or dad into shared accommodation, and we all thought that was the end of shared accommodation. But once again, due to a lack of new supply, some of those older style facilities have actually been given an extended useful life. For how much longer, who knows? But that's been an interesting sort of feature that we've seen. In terms of new facilities up in Queensland, they're all trading up extremely strongly. Really strong RAD collection, and in almost all cases, well and truly getting their capital back from a RAD collection perspective. In terms of RV, existing and new villages selling really well. New villages are enjoying really strong EOI or pre-sale campaigns. Funny though, we are seeing the pre-sale rate, the fall-over rate within pre-sales sort of increasing. If you wind the clock back 10 years, we hardly saw any pre-sales fall over, where we are seeing quite a few fall over these days. But, we think that's probably driven by a couple of things. One, construction programs. Generally these days it's a good 18 months, 2 years to build something. So often from the time someone, signs up to a pre-sale agreement to practical completion can be, upwards of 3 years, and a lot can happen in that time to to a resident, health-wise or what have you. But also the buyer's different these days for sure. So, 10 years ago, residents thought long and hard about handing over that $5,000, refundable deposit. They still do think long and hard about it right now, but we are seeing more and more, take that deposit and go elsewhere or change their mind or what have you. But pleasingly, pre-sales that do fall over are being replaced really quickly, and often at prices 20, 30% higher. So it's a funny situation where our RV operators and developers are actually happy for some pre-sales to fall over towards the end of a project because they can, replace them quickly and bump up the pricing. And from an LLC perspective, look, that continues to go from strength to strength up in Queensland, and I'll cover that off shortly in more detail. Over to you, Belinda.
Thanks, Scott. In New South Wales, we're seeing a significant uplift in activities and inquiries coming through to the bank. I think it's fair to say in the last 3 months, we've had more inquiries regarding developments than we've had in the last 2 years. So there's a number of things driving that we've talked about today. Partly, obviously, we've seen that flattening, and we think we've reached that peak of interest rates. So people are getting confident then in terms of funding costs that are going to be happening. Likewise, from a construction cost point of view, that's started to normalise, so people can cost these and look to start locking in builders and the like. Obviously, we've had increased demand that we're seeing on the retirement side. And then finally, with things happening in the market, we're seeing just that increased confidence in the aged care market, and that's allowing people to move forward, often with things that they put on ice in the last few years, but likewise look at new developments. What's really interesting, though, is if we look at the types of developments that people are coming to talk to us about. Previously, we've had, well, I should say now we're starting to see aged care operators that might have just had a few ILUs on the side. They're now talking to us about going in and building a whole new retirement village. Likewise, for our retirement village operators, we're seeing more inquiries about assisted living. So the presentation that Cam Ansell had yesterday, where he talked about us moving towards this new model of home care, I think that we're well and truly on that journey now, and that's reflective in the types of developments that we're starting to see come across our desk from a funding perspective. But I'll hand over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Belinda. So I guess in keeping with the optimism theme of this summit, our observations in WA are one of growing positivity in the aged care sector. We're seeing the increase in labour that's been forthcoming in the last 12 months has been positively received. The increase in RAD prices consistent with the rising real estate market in Perth. And add to that increases in occupancy. So it's pretty positive all round from that point of view, from those three measures in terms of aged care. Furthermore, we're seeing the ANAC funding model being more positively received by more and more CEOs and CFOs that I talk to. So that's good to see, and we think that will continue based on those comments given to us. Through development funding, we've seen the successful completion of a number of aged care facilities and retirement villages in WA over the last, 18 months. And it is also pleasing to see that these facilities are ramping up in line with the original forecasts that the operators and villages prepared. Further evidence that demand for ILUs and aged care beds is being sustained in the sector. So that's good to see. On that note, I might hand over to Kate. What's going on in Victoria?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, I suppose we don't really need to recap COVID implications on Victoria because they were quite significant. But the flow-on effect from a seniors living perspective would be a halt on development throughout the period, with the exception of a few larger players, then pressure on occupancy and pressure on liquidity. But positively, we're seeing a shift and an uptick in occupancy across the three the three sectors with restrictions eased, obviously, and I guess improved public perception of the industry-wide, and that was spoken about yesterday, so I think we're all in agreement on that. Development activity has increased with the normalisation of costs, ability to get trades, which was a massive issue in Victoria throughout the period. And again, optimism regarding the sector. I think there's just a new lease on life with it. One added obstacle, which was a bit strange, but during COVID for RVs and LLCs was a slowdown on rollovers, DMF rollovers, which then caused financial pressure on the operators. But CBA understood that that was just a temporary pain and that wasn't going to be the go-forward position. And on my book in particular, we've seen a real increase in DMF rollovers. And there's increased demand for stock, refurb stock, so people are on the lookout for funds, which is great, and we remain optimistic in Victoria, so if you need some money, please reach out.
Thanks, everyone. And it's really good to get the different state perspectives. I know every state is unique in some ways, but there is definitely that common theme in line with the summit of optimism and all the sectors rebounding quite well from the challenges over the last few years. So some more questions. I think, Scott, you're from Queensland, probably the leader in the LLC market. How do you see that huge rise in investment that we're seeing in the land lease community market? There's been no shortage of capital coming in over the last few years. That's probably kept cap rates low. What do the banks view the land lease market, that land lease community market as? Is it like RVs, similar risk profiles? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we're big supporters of both the RV and the LL industries. We've got appetite to continue growing in both industries, and we don't really see them in competition. The average entry age is probably 10 years difference between an RV versus an LLC. But you're right, Brian, there has been a lot of investment in the LLC industry in recent years, and whilst it's been around for a long time, the industry was certainly put in lights back in sort of mid-2021 when Stockland acquired Halcyon. And ever since then, we've seen a lot of investment, a lot of M&A activity, and that's likely to continue, and a lot of new development as well. We think that investment's happened for many reasons why we like banking in the LLC industry. It's the obvious one, but the grey tsunami of grey retirees is coming through, and we think there's at least another 10 years of that to sort of play through. The ever increasing community living. Certainly COVID was a big shot in the arm for the RV and the LLC industries, and all the photos and marketing material we saw during COVID of people in LLCs having street parties and sitting on their camp chairs, socially distanced apart and what have you on their driveways really resonated, and that's just continued since COVID. We've just seen that real increase in people seeking community lifestyles. The product mix has really evolved in the LLC industry in recent years, and wind the clock back 10 years, and it probably was seen as a more affordable product for retirees that had, I suppose, more modest levels of wealth. But now we're seeing a real change in the product mix. We're seeing some really premium product, a lot of product north of $1.5 million for MHE or LLC homes, and that's bringing in a new target audience of people that have got a lot of assets just outside the family home. So we certainly like the fact that it now talks to a much larger audience. The shorter time, the build time frames, allows LLC developers to be a lot more nimble in terms of their pricing. Those build times did blow out during COVID, but they're certainly sort of down sub 20 weeks now to build homes, and that really allows you to be nimble in terms of your pricing, and ensures you don't really get caught out. And then, of course, we like the stability of the cash flows that an LLC sort of can provide. There's no such thing as a bulletproof cash flow in this world, but in our view, a completed LLC that's fully sold down is probably as close as you'll ever get.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Belinda, I'm going to take a bit of a pivot back to task force, back to aged care, and a bit of a pivot back to maybe your old role within health strategy. As I mentioned before, we're sort of high-level details, but maybe can you talk us through the task force recommendation, possible removal of RADs in 2035?
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that we have to talk to today because I'm sure you're interested in the bank's view. But, in terms of the task force report and the removal of RADs, I think we look at that and we go, well, we've still got another 5 years until we're going to go back and plan to say how will we then phase out RADs, with the phasing out of RADs to occur in 2035. So that's a very long time if we get to that point where we are phasing out RADs. So I think the worst thing a bank could do right now is have a knee-jerk reaction to that and be going, well, how are we going to be changing funding and the like. As Mike Baird talked about yesterday, there's $8 billion of bank funding, $35 billion government funding for RADs. So this is a conversation that we want to be part of in terms of that planning, and we will be, to make sure that there is a solution about how we get to that point when we're going to be phasing out RADs. So I think right now, like the advice I want to give to everyone that is either doing a development or is looking to do a development, that as a bank we're here to support you in the funding model that we have right now, which is RADs, and we'll continue to work with the sector, with government, to find that pathway through to the phasing out of RADs. In terms of the report you mentioned earlier, Brian, we view it very favourably in terms of how this is going to help fund the sector, which we know has been underfunded for a very long time. Co-contribution, very positive, brings additional cash flows to the sector. Moving to a rental model, again, brings additional cash flows to the sector. Retention of RADs, we're all used to it through retirement and DMF, we know how it works. Again, really good for the sector. I found it really interesting listening to Grant Cordroy yesterday when he talked about that the setting of the 3% of the retention was so that we don't change consumer behaviour. So that was really interesting because for me it speaks to that is not going to be the big factor that will shift people away from RADs versus DAPs. But I think it's fair that operators should be aware just generally of shifts happening in RADs versus DAPs, because we have seen that there has been a bit of a shift towards DAPs, not a major one, but we are starting to see that shift. And a lot of that's coming from average length of stay and acuity. And many times a resident moving in, and by the time that they've sold their house and ready to pay a RAD, that they've passed away, sadly. So it's like anything for operators, I'd be giving advice to be really thinking through just generally liquidity and how you might be funding some of that movement away, be it through bank funding, maybe it's how you use the retention that you're keeping, and really thinking through it from that point of view. The other thing I would add is we move towards these models which are increasing cash flow. As a bank, we lend against cash flow. It's not just lending against RADs. We can look at the going concern value of that business and apportion a certain amount of debt to that. So as we move, if we believe we're going to be moving away from RADs, there are other options and opportunities for the bank to provide funding. So, that would be my leaving remark on this point, is that we definitely still very much have appetite through funding through the sector. We know there's been a hard time, and we're excited in the coming years to see where the sector's going to be going to.
Thank you, Belinda. And yeah, no doubt that RAD piece is something as banks will be keeping a very close eye on. Andrew, moving to you. You look after a lot of aged care and retirement village operators in WA, which is somewhat a unique market. Can you sort of talk us through what sort of funding that you've been providing to providers recently? Is it liquidity, developments, or acquisitions?
Yeah, sure, Brian. So look, we do provide all forms of funding through CBA into the various sectors. But more generally, what we're seeing is the acute shortage of residential properties in Perth and certain regional areas of WA is seeing increasing demand for retirement village ILUs. Not just increasing demand, the occupancy is high, and as that continues, we think the only solution there is the construction of further retirement villages. So not only that, we're finding our operators are telling us that the turnover time to sell an ILU by a resident is shortened considerably, which is good, certainly in their eyes. We think if construction costs can be managed and builder risk can be managed, then the residential shortages should see an increase in development in retirement village, certainly being well received, and we think that's likely to be forthcoming into the sector. In terms of aged care, over the last 18 months, I think we've seen a lot of acquisition in the aged care sector, whilst construction has slowed. But that acquisition has mainly been in the areas of, I guess, mid-size operators acquiring smaller operators as the consolidation into the sector continues. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. It's really good to hear there's a lot of activity, and I know WA through COVID had that acute workforce issue, so really good to hear all of that is picking up now. Last question, Kate. We know that the development of aged care beds isn't keeping up with demand. We know that RVs and LLCs to a certain extent are replacing aged care beds as providing care for residents. We know there's been a lot more developments in the RV and LLC space recently. Do you want to talk through the approach about banks lending against developments versus established sites?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. Look, I'm a big believer in the role of RV and LLC in the go-forward, care model, facilitating the provision of in-home care, allowing residents to stay in that village setting till essentially end of life, and had lots of great conversations last night over some wine about this model, and it's already being implemented across the country, and everyone's doing it quite well. So yes, very important. I think first thing to say is CBA has appetite for both development transactions and acquisition funding in the LLC and RV space. Notwithstanding, the debt is structured quite differently between the two. All transactions we look at are really based on their own merit. So today is going to be quite general, but the funding levels, I suppose, are measured dependent on the metrics and the strength of the sponsor. So if I start off with the development side of RVs, we're supportive of standalone developments and group structures or portfolio basis with competitive lending thresholds based on the self-liquidating nature of the debt. Key factors I think that we look at when we're looking at an RV development is market acceptance, which is key, which we usually measure through pre-sales, and then also interest cover. Generally, we would capitalise interest on a development, but some transactions are structured in a way that if there's alternate income streams from other assets, we can leverage off that and increase the debt funding. So definitely keen to do developments. The established or acquisition funding of RV villages presents a little bit more challenging transaction, but we are definitely in the market and want to support it, but the inconsistency of DMF revenue, which I'm sure you can all understand. When we look at a transaction like this, we look to mitigate the lumpiness of the DMF via scale. So if there's a portfolio, different maturities, it can it's a more consistent income stream, and headwinds at a particular site aren't so severe. And then often we will look to do interest cover. So, a year's interest put away in a secure term deposit. And once that village matures, we can look to release that. So that's, there are ways around established portfolios. But on the flip side, LLCs, as Scott mentioned, they have the benefit of the reoccurring income stream, which makes it a little bit easier to bank, and the flexibility comes in structuring the debt for LLCs. But in both scenarios, I think a key consideration for me and the bank is the working capital injection at the beginning. This, to me, is a key focus and a dial-moving piece. I've seen operators or transactions where they haven't injected enough capital, they haven't had the ability to undertake the buybacks, refurbish the stock, and it's just a disaster. So that is a really fundamental piece of the puzzle. But yeah, once again, look, we're really keen to support the sector. We're keen to support development, acquisition, refurbishment. So please reach out.
Thank you, Kate. Yep, thank you. I think we have somehow gone over time. So thanks again for the panellists for joining me on stage. Thank you to all of you for your attention. Please come and have a chat to us. Besides the 5 of us on stage, there's another 8 sort of CBA staff scattered through the room. So I'm happy to take questions if we have time, but apologies for going over.
That's okay. Do we have any questions for the panels? Actually, that was a very thorough... Any questions? That was a very thorough rundown, and actually I found it very, very interesting, so thank you very much. And it's impressive to hear how on the ball you all are with your individual states, and yeah, it's very encouraging. Thank you. We've got one more presentation before lunch, and it's actually going to be a discussion between myself and Tamar Krebs, who I'd like to ask to the stage. So Tamar, if you'd like to take a seat whilst I grab the clicker. I was really keen to have Tamar present or have a discussion with us today because we've travelled around the world, been to many countries looking at aged care and in particular dementia. And it's the old story, isn't it? You discover that the very best in the world is actually right on your doorstep. And that's the situation with what Tamar has created with group homes. And I'm going to ask her what her journey was. But before I do, I'd like to just to give you an idea of what group homes is and what the model is. We've got a couple of slides and again a handheld video that we took about 2 weeks ago in St Ives. So thank you very much. So if we can just explain that group homes is exactly what it says. It's a group home. If we think back to disability homes, and Tamara says it's very well, it's a standard house and a standard street. So here is what they look like. Here is a range of group homes and what they look like inside. So you can see they're in the suburbs of Sydney, across the suburbs of Sydney. 26 now, Tamar? 26 of them. And when you walk inside, this is what you look. So they look like a standard home. They are a standard home on a standard block of soil. And as I grabbed this last night from your website, Ita Buttrose, who is not, I've had a lot to do with Ita. She is not an easy person to please or to get credit from, but she said this is without doubt the best model of dementia care in an assisted environment that I've seen, and I agree with this is a typical home in St Ives that we were at 2 weeks ago. So what you saw there is a typical, it's a 700 square metre block of land, thereabouts?
That one's 1,000 square meters.
1,000 square metres. So Tamar, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us who you are, how you got into this business, and then what is a group home in Group Home Australia?
So some of you might have heard me on the panel, so excuse for the repetition. I've been in the field of dementia care for 27 years, and primarily in residential aged care, in memory care, support units, special care units, and about 12 years ago, just stopped. It was in a hallway, and I could hear the call bells and trolleys and smells, and I thought, I don't want to age in a place like this, and I don't want to put someone I love in a place like this, but what else is out there? And I started a bit of a journey going around the world looking at different models. And it was at the time where I was just finishing my master's in research and had my 4th child. And what the research was saying is people want to stay in their own home. And that's plan A. So I loved how you said plan B, because we live life in plan Bs. I think we plan and, we laugh afterwards. And so what does home mean to different people is very much, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, it's a one-size-fits-one. And so it was about raising the capital and disrupting an industry which is a very, excuse the term, a non-sexy industry. People don't like to talk about dementia. People don't like to think about it. And so it was pitching and saying, could we redefine and reframe how we support people to live well with dementia in the community, not locked up in dementia-secure units? And so that sort of took us into 2012, where our first home opened in St. Ives. And the Royal Commission then came knocking on our door saying, we're really interested in this model. And why is it that you're doing it and no one else is doing it? Because everyone talks about home-like environments and people talk about it, and we sell the person-centered care, quality of life, relationship-based, lots of words. And so recommendation 45 was based on the household model. And I know that they looked at, Hammond care as well, but it was very much saying that people thrive in a home environment, particularly for those living with dementia.
And just for the audience, a standard group home is between 6 and 10 residents?
Yes, 6 to 10 residents living together in a home.
Right. And I'm going to jump to the money, because that's what everybody wants to know. How do you do this? So you have 6 to 10 residents in the home. How does the money work, and how much does it cost?
Thanks for starting with the end in mind. And so, yes, the money is as follows. People pay, there's a few models. And so we have people that are over 65 and younger than 65. Younger than 65, people that are on the NDIS. The NDIS will cover about 80%. And then there's a co-contribution for the accommodation, because it's not an SDA. People over 65, they have a few ways of funding their care. And so if we start at $230,000 per annum, take back using your home care package, that will reduce level 4 package, $50,000 per annum. And then you have the option of either putting a lump sum or not, so reducing the fees from $180K even more. And so people can structure their fee and have a co-contribution as they see fit.
And whilst that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but what you're providing is a vastly different quality of life.
So the way to think about it is people coming into the home are essentially selling their family home when they're moving into Iraq. So in the areas that we build our homes, primarily the houses, and let's just say $1 million, but they're probably north of 2. And so they're selling their family home, and then they can use about $250,000 with us for the length of time that they're going to stay with us, anywhere from 24 to 36 months. Some people stay longer, some people less. But essentially, it's a choice for the children, because it's primarily the children or the partner that are making this choice to move into care. And so it is affordable, but they do have to structure their fees in a particular way. And
you have grown organically from that first home in St Ives. What year did that open?
2012.
2012, and we're in 2024 now. So in 12 years, Tamar Krebs on her own. You don't have a large corporation behind you. You've just done it yourself, and so you now have 26 of these.
Well, we have great shareholders, and we have a great team, and the industry, unfortunately or fortunately, there is a big need to think differently about dementia because there's horror stories. And we have a generation, and it was spoken about yesterday and today, it's not just the baby boomers. We're seeing baby boomers and Gen X's, and they have different needs, different wants, different desires, and we need to make sure that we're not planning a model. And that's why I very rarely talk about a model of care, but a home is something that can be reimagined, rethought, reset, and just keep innovating for the different generations that are coming through.
So tell the audience about your home carers.
So our homemakers, our staff.
Homemakers.
So when redesigning the homes and rethinking about how are we going to do this, it was not just about, best practice dementia design or creating a home or what does that look like. It was redesigning the workforce architecture. And when we talk about workforce, a lot of people talk about the care. And care is a very small part of what we deliver. And so the homemakers are trained to be what's called a universal worker and self-led teams. So each home has about 10 homemakers, 4 full-time, and the rest are either part-time or casual. We don't use any agency staff. And the homemakers are trained to do the cooking, the cleaning, the engagement, the rostering, the budgeting. It's not led by registered nurses, it's led by the homemakers.
So your model is that you do have a nurse who might oversee several group homes?
So we have an entire support team, and in that support team are registered nurses and social workers. Don't undermine that dementia comes with ambiguity and loss and grief, and much of the complaints that come through to the RNs, probably there should be a social worker on staff. And so again, looking at the workforce architecture, it's looking at who supports the homes, who supports the homemakers, the residents, and the families. And so registered nurses do oversee, and we do have 24/7 coverage, but not on site.
Yeah, and the reality is you get remarkable results with your residents, don't you? So even saying that the average time is 3 to 4 years, so which is significantly longer than most people have residents for dementia. But behavioural changes, I've observed at your home significant behavioural changes. So, my mother had dementia with Lewy bodies and was very aggressive. How do you handle something like that?
So often, when we're training people, I often will say that dementia doesn't take people's dignity away. It's the people that take the dignity away from the person with dementia, and it's the people around them. There is a perception that people with Lewy bodies or frontotemporal dementia are aggressive. I call them unmet needs. If I locked you up, you would also get pretty aggressive. If I put Andrea Rio on replay for you, you'd probably throw something at the TV. If I sat you in a sing-along, now I don't know you, Chris, very well, but you don't strike me as someone that does sing-along or play bingo. But the chances are that if I did that every single day, and you were sitting down all day, you'd be banging on a door and becoming a little bit aggressive. And let's just layer on it a little bit more. If I brought a stranger into the shower and that you didn't know them and they started undressing you, you'd become resistive to care. So we have to stop dehumanizing or medicalizing something that every single person in this room would do the same. And so when you start humanizing the person and giving them the experiences and understanding who they are, who they were, understanding their life story, and you replicate those rituals and routines that they had, whether they were a marathon runner, whether they were someone who was really private, whether they were someone who loved to contribute to the household, whether they loved going out all day, you start seeing their needs met and a lot less unmet needs. We don't eliminate them, so it's not a magic wand, but we minimize them for sure.
So there was So the first group home that I visited was at Killara. And I was sort of taken aback by the overall environment. And I had all these doubts going through my mind, thinking it looks too good to be true. And I had the usual, and again, aggressive people with aggression in dementia. And Tomas said, well, actually, we have a gentleman in this home who was rejected by many other operators because of his aggression. And we said, no, we will, we'd be pleased to work with this gentleman. And we identified that he was a marathon runner. And so we identified that if he ran 15 kilometres every day, he would be a very happy person. And so we have one of our homemakers go for a run with him every day for 15 kilometres. And I thought to myself, bullshit. That does not happen. I'm sorry. And half an hour later, when we were actually walking through the home, one of your homemakers came out with a water bottle and his sneakers on, and the said gentleman also with a water bottle and his sneakers, and off they went. So he was going for his daily run. He was a very fit-looking homemaker that you had there.
He became a fit homemaker. He didn't start that way.
The other thing that is genuinely impressive is you do take your residents out every day.
So the big concept of not going out, in my mind, is a jail. So people in jail don't go out. And the concept of home is you leave it and you come back to it. And there has to be that routine and that rhythm that you go out and you go to purposeful places. And it might be a coffee shop, it might be for a bushwalk, it might be to the gallery, it might be wherever you think is meaningful and purposeful. It's incredible to see that our residents with dementia, albeit some very significant memory loss, when the minivan rocks up and the door opens, all the ladies run for their bags, the men run for their hats, and out the door they go. Because it's the feeling that it's generated, that they're not locked into a confined space or a confined garden, but that they do go out, and it's wonderful.
And with 6 to 10 residents, that's entirely plausible to do.
Yep, we do need to do a bit of education in the different local shopping centres, because dementia is messy. And so there's great opportunity there as well to be able to go to the local coffee shops. And we have a resident that every time she goes, she asks the waiters if they'll marry her. And they say no, and so and she would swear at them and tell them to F off. And so we said, we have two options. We can either stop coming here or just say yes. We won't hold you to anything. And so now she goes to the coffee shop 2-3 times a week. She asks the waiter, will you marry me? He says yes, thumbs up. She gets her coffee and a beautiful outing. We have to stop shying away from, what if they do something embarrassing? They might, and dementia is messy. There are days that it's very messy, but that's okay, and we need to lean into that and embrace it and educate and even celebrate it at times.
So in our conversations, and I was saying, well, how we need in the retirement village space in particular, assistance with dementia. And if we're not going to have beds that we can assist people to transition into, and we're going to have more people with care challenges and in particular dementia in villages, how can we bring the group home model to retirement villages? So the video that we showed yesterday with Judy, which was filmed a year ago, wasn't it, Judy? So that wasn't set up for today, where Judy was saying that dementia, there are at least 5 people in her village that have dementia that should be, need assistance. So, and what Judy was also saying is that managers are there until 5 o'clock, go home, and they're not there on the weekends, and so the residents with dementia and also the other residents are left on their own, so that you don't have people in villages 24/7 who are experienced in dementia. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we were able to have a group home in each village? And you also provide respite, don't you? So, even as a respite so the wife can have respite from the husband who might have dementia for a day or two?
So the way to think about it is as follows. Retirement Village, some of you are already doing care hubs and phenomenal work, and you all do, we all wake up in the morning trying to do phenomenal work. Dementia is a very specific skill, as you would all be very aware, and a retirement village might be very good at the general approach to aging and lifestyle and wellness and being able to cater to all these needs of an aging population. What you do incredibly well is you create a community already. Where the challenge is once a person develops dementia and significant dementia, they have to sometimes move out of the village, which is not fair. You want to be able to offer your clients, consumers, residents, participants a continuum of life, that they can continue to live there in a one-stop shop. Where we also have to move away is thinking of an all or nothing approach. It's either they stay in the village or they move out if they get dementia. Co-locating a group home on the land allows for two things. One, if the person does develop significant cognitive impairment, they could move within the village to a group home. They still stay in the community, and you will see a significant reduction in those unmet needs because there's familiarity. And the one thing we know that supports a person living with dementia is the familiarity and the friendliness. The other thing, and you mentioned it in your presentation, Chris, is that when couples are living together and the informal care or support partner is taking care of that person at home, respite at the moment in Australia is thought of as an accommodation. Have a break. I'd encourage us to rethink about it, and this is where it becomes exciting, where it can be a flexible respite, where someone might move someone into a group home on the retirement village land, but we will train the support partner to be part of the solution, and then the person can go home. And they might do that a couple of times of transitioning between flexible respite, not the 21 days, it might be a weekend, it might be 5 days, and one of the big offerings that we do at the moment is people are coming into the community that have zero intention to ever move into a care environment, but they want to learn. And so the person will come in, they'll come for 5 days, and they go home and they get this beautiful plan with a support partner or the home care provider, and we're training the home care providers how to deliver the care. And they come in, we have people that come in for 4 days, and it might be over 6 months, a couple of days, and each time there's education and a break. So not an all or nothing approach, but very much a one size fits one, and tailoring that journey so that people can definitely live with dementia in their own home, in the community for longer.
And so if we were to look at having a group home within a retirement village, how much area would it require to build, because you basically purpose build a group home. So how much land, for instance, would you require?
Ideally 1,000 square meters. 1,000 square meters gives us the footprint that we want. And if you don't have 1,000 square meters, 750, I'm looking at our property person, 750 square meters is good enough. The other way to think about it is if you have a floor. So vertical homes, and that's one of the things is, learning is about also going around the world and seeing what is everyone else doing, bringing it back and then deciding, well, how do we Australianize it? How do we customize it? How would we look at the different organization? It's not, again, there are people here that have racks and they won't be able to do this, the standalone home, but are there elements to this approach that they can think about? And I'd encourage people to think about it. But to your point, 1,000 square meters, co-located in your village would be wonderful.
And you now have you've perfected it. You've done it 26 times. So you have the IP, and you're keen to expand and share your IP and bring solutions. So if there are people in the room who would be interested in talking about having a group home in your village, you'd be very interested in speaking to them.
I would, and we haven't perfected it, we're mastering it. That means every single time we become better and better and better.
Right. So we could talk for another half hour, but it's lunchtime. But I do encourage everybody here to learn more about what the work Tamar has been doing. Everybody that we've introduced to Tamar has been absolutely blown away by the properties themselves, the staff, the programs, and how easy it all looks. I'm sure it's not easy, but Everybody looks very relaxed and chilled in a group home, which is the absolute opposite of a normal dementia experience. So can we show our appreciation? Okay, it's time for lunch. Thank you very much for staying with us. We're due to be back at 1:45. If we could aim to be back at around about 1:45, that would be excellent for the rest of the program. And we've got a great afternoon. We've got Norrell Wild, followed by Christopher Pine and Simon Miller, and Ross Humphreys. All really excellent presentations. Thank you.